So I'm pretty sure that, we've been going through these examples of the Exodus. We've been going through the story. We've been going through everything that has been connected to it. And I'm pretty sure by now we can see that it's an allegory. It's an allegory that can be taken as a whole for the group, or it's an allegory that can be taken for the individual person. In the group sense, you've got a group fixed to religious error, an assembly taken um, that has been enslaved, and this is a war about God. So this is a war on the gods of the false devotional experience. So we can say that this is we can fix this to a group. A group is coming out of a false religious experience. It is establishing a revolution. They're revolutionizing the landscape. And after revolutionizing the landscape, they're planting their institution. But in the more, sorry, private sense, I take, as I take the Bible to be getting at, and I think is more beneficial for what is mentally and devotionally going on with us personally, it's a more intimate experience. So you've got the Exodus, and we've gone through the illustrations of it. The religion of Egypt, escaping the religion of Egypt, personally applying plagues to the conversation tied to the religion of Egypt. From those plagues entering into a solitary confinement, a solitary location, being alone, entering into that wilderness experience for the conversation's thoughts and feelings, and learning principles and learning beliefs, reforming the conversation to fit now the experience, and experiencing and learning how to experience the new principles and the new understanding that such an experience is giving, entering into covenant relationship with the influence of that experience, and then solidifying a sanctuary or a temple for both that experience and the covenant drawn up or observed. So this is all an allegory for a personal experience. We're going to have to go through an experience where we are forming a personal covenant with the mind influencing our journey. We're going to have to go through a period of principles, and that's the thing. The Exodus as a whole is an allegory for our personal devotional experience with the mind influencing the scriptures. It is an allegory for our experience, for our journey with the mind influencing the scriptures. As we are, and we not personal, we are devotional conversations conscience conceived within the religious world. Being conceived within the religious world, we are conceived in a paradigm of Egyptian religion. Now, the Egyptian religion doesn't have to be literal. Doesn't have to be literal. The religion of Egypt is a paradigm. And the religion of Egypt is a paradigm where you have a male head father figure known as the creator of all, joined together by an essence, uh, female in nature, or supposedly thought to be female in nature, and then a male son, or a son figure, a trinity, a triad is what the Egyptian religion is known as, or can be taken of the paradigm there. And along with that trio or that triad, there are other associating entities around there that the conversation relies on, and that the conversation is subjected to, and that the religious belief is dependent upon. So when we are caught up in the religion of Egypt, we are caught up in this format. We're caught up in this format, again, of a head father creator figure, of a chief female goddess, queen of heaven, known for her essence, And then for the Son of such an essence and figure that is head of creation and of all things. This is the Egyptian paradigm. This is the Egyptian paradigm. And it is dependent upon us to escape it. And this isn't something I'm inventing. This is Bible. This is the allegory. This is the allegory that is connected to what inspired the mind within the scriptures. This is that allegory. And so when we can recognize that paradigm in our conversation attached to it, because every single devotional conversation is conceived within the religious world, and this is the paradigm of the religious world. This is the paradigm. When we can see this, and when we can finally beg for help and deliverance from it, when we are finally heard, we will begin to experience a coming out of such an experience. We will begin to have a journey of escape. And in this journey of escape, we can either take it two ways. We can look at it as, okay, and now I don't believe in anything because this is all wrong. This is just false. I am a whatever you want to put there after it. I am now a skeptic. I am now this. I am now that. Or we can go, you know what? That was not the experience. There's more to it, and there has to be. So we can look at it from those two perspectives and then move on from there. But the Bible would have us take the notion of I've been deceived willingly and I've been conceived in deception, as it says in the Psalms, from my mother's womb have I been conceived in iniquity. This mother is not the literal mother in the scriptures. This is the mother church. This is the mother religious understanding. And so from that conception, I acknowledge and I understand that I've been conceived, not I personally, but my devotional mind, my belief in religious error. And then begins the journey. Picking up the scriptures to get an understanding of what it is talking about in a practical sense, to where we can develop an understanding, and those understandings becoming plagues to our former belief, to our former conversation. And so we're following the idea or the charge or the principle or the counsel in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, put off your former conversation and be renewed in the spirit of your mind and be created new. That's the creation. That's the Exodus in those verses. Literally, like that's the allegory of the Exodus. And so taking those plagues of understanding, applying them to our former conversation, we're now developing new principles and new commandments. And yes, just as there was no book of the law in the wilderness in the story, there is no before they went through all of this with nothing upon their immediate exit from Egypt, with nothing except one voice articulating principles. Now, we don't have a literal Moses, but what we do have are words from a book, the Bible. The Bible is to be the voice guiding our exit from Egypt, figurative quote unquote Egypt. And we are to learn the principles as we are traveling alone in that journey from this book. And those principles are the same principles found in Genesis 1, in Genesis 2, and in Genesis 3. These are the principles. If we want to know what the Bible's philosophy is, check these 3 chapters out. Because in these 3 chapters, you have diet, you have seventh day appointment, and you have core philosophy concerning regeneration and resurrection and reformation of the conversation's conscience. These 3 chapters are holding the scope or the full scope of the Bible's core philosophy. And in the story, that host had to regain knowledge of these 3 chapters, the principles therein. Same responsibility and same accountability falls on us when we're traveling through that same experience figuratively. We will learn the principles within those first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis concerning how to maintain our belief, how to refresh our belief, how to continue to apply strategically an experience to the journey of our belief, how to have our belief continually growing, the wisdom that is necessary for our belief to remain young. That's in the Proverbs, chapter 3. Remember my words, put my law into your heart, then shall they add to you length of days and long life. It is the words of the living God that add long life. It is the learned commandments that are within the scriptures that add long life. This long life is for the devotional conversation's conscience. According to the mind within the scriptures, it is our conversation that is to live long. It is our conversation that is to live long. And the living long that the Bible advertises is an understanding, a continual or a perpetual refreshing of the conversation's conscience, that it may remain young and never go old. Remember, put off your former conversation, the old man or the old mind. The conversation grows old the more that it is not adhering to an experience where it is personally exercising its conscience, where it is not personally experiencing or cultivating to itself wisdom. The conversation will grow old. It will grow old in the habits of the oldness that is within the religious world, which is a culture and an experience and a routine that is handwritten, that is full of prescriptions, and that is simply not giving sway to the understanding that can be gained through faith or through an experimental faith. So when we can allow our conversation to do this and to pass through that sort of experience, then we are allowing our conversation to enter into covenant. And entering into covenant with itself, it is understanding that it is more than what it is. It is understanding that it is supposed to be attached to the conscience or to the character that is within the scriptures. And attaching itself to the conscience or to the character that is within the scriptures, it can transcend where it's supposed to be, and that's the whole point there. Transcending its current experience, transcending its current experience, so that it can and will have the opportunity to enter into covenant with the one influencing that, and that's the allegory there. What you have is an allegory of an individual group. We can call them an individual consciousness coming out of religious error for the sake or for the purpose of forming a bond to the mind guiding them out, and forming that bond via covenant. Now, forget the details. Forget the details, forget what is in there. Forget that and just focus on the allegory. Because the allegory is what our conversation is supposed to mirror, is what our conversation is supposed to mimic. Now, our conversation is supposed to go through an experience exiting a paradigm Egyptian religion so that it can form a covenant with the mind inspiring its exit. And that covenant is a personal bond. That covenant is a personal bond of respect, to where the conversation will give itself to the experience without anything else guiding it, to where the conversation will give itself to the experience and to only the mind inspiring its exodus. So we have to grow familiar with that mind. We have to grow familiar with that mind and the context of that mind, because the allegory that the Exodus points to, it's pointing to us entering into a personal covenant with that mind. And with that mind, to where we no longer need an opinion to rely on, to where we no longer need a routine to rely on, to where the fulfillment, as it says in the New Covenant promise, all shall know me. They shall not need to be taught from the lowest to the greatest. They will all know me. They will all know me because it is a process of the mind, the devotional conversation of mind being engraved, being written on, as it says in the Corinthians, not by ink, not by ink, but by the finger of the living Spirit, not by ink. That's a rebuke against what is handwritten, the handwritten experience by theory, by baptism, by routine, by everything that we can say has ink to it. And with ink comes the mind of the theologian, comes the mind of the expert, comes the mind of the scholar, which is something that the Bible wants the conversation to exist without. Not being written by ink, but by words, because that's all we have. Allowing the conversation to dive into its experience with the words of the scriptures allows the conversation to enter into a personal covenant with the one influencing and inspiring their exit from the paradigm of Egypt. And that's what I wanted to focus on, because that's what was on my heart since last week, is that personal covenant. That personal covenant has to be made because that's what ties us to our experience. We've understood that our experience is indecent. We've understood that there has been something fraudulent within our experience. We've understood that the journey isn't as whole because something's missing. Well, what's missing is the personal responsibility to our experience. And when we can allow our conversation to pass through a journey of being alone, depending on no one and nothing else except words, spending time on understanding words, crying over and praying over those words, well, then we will be able to develop a personal relationship with those words that has nothing to do with the book, because the words are being formed within. The formation of those words within, that is what carries our conversation through whatever it is going to be carried through. And most of all, it is what allows our conversation to return back to the mind inspiring it and it to the words inspiring it. So the Bible never is out of the picture. It is just no longer being that core dependent, because now we have it within. We don't have chapter by chapter, verse by verse, book by book within all 1,000, 2,000 pages of it. Within, we have an experience of those words and pages and books and chapters within, and it is our personal experience with that continues to allow us to faithfully endure the experience of learning more of it and being confident and courageous to turn back to it when needed and when necessary, and to study from it consistently so that we can continually have material to prune and to purge our journey and conversation with and by. It is this personal covenant, just as, again, strip away everything that we tie the Exodus to, take it all away, and just let the principles of the allegory remain. Just let the principles of the allegory remain. The principles of Egyptian paradigm, coming out of Egyptian paradigm, spending time after having plagues given to the former level of consciousness in a solitary wilderness to strike up a covenant and then to have a sanctuary planted. Take these principles, forget the people that were doing this, forget everything. Quit, just don't pay any attention to that, but think about the allegory connected to it and the principles there, because that is the outline of what our experience should be. That's the outline. That's the outline. And no matter what, when we are willingly exiting the Egyptian paradigm, and when we are willingly taking the scriptures in hand to hear its voice to guide us further out of it, we will gain principles and understanding that we can apply to our former belief as plagues to enlighten it, as plagues to win our freedom from the lost consciousness. We will gain understanding and we will gain commandments, specific commandments that do not have to be taught to us, that do not need to be found etched in stone. These will be gained the more that we're spending time with the mind, with the devotional character within the scriptures. Again, what we will gain are the commandments or principles found in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and Genesis chapter 3. These are unchanging. These are unchanging because the experience is unchanging. This is an experience of atonement. This is an experience of redemption. This is an experience of deliverance. And in every case and in every situation, the principles and the understandings, the commandments, the counsel that is gained is from Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Everything there is what the conversation will learn. But we won't know this, and we cannot know this if we're not willing to let our conversation just exist without its former environment. That's the allegory that the Exodus is pointing to. So long as we remain within our environment, and our environment is Egyptian in nature by a paradigm of Egypt, so long as we remain in this paradigm, we will not be able to understand the commandments and the diet necessary to take our journey in our experience to where it needs to be. Our journey in our experience needs to be with the mind that inspired the scriptures. The mind inspiring the scriptures is a core philosophy of resurrection and reformation, of renewal and refreshing for the conscience, for the thoughts and the feelings of the conversation. Our conversation is to go through this exodus from the Egyptian paradigm just so that it can have a covenant to form with the mind inspiring its leave of absence from its former environment to now being renewed in the spirit of its mind for the purpose of becoming a new creation. For, by, and through the mind inspiring its exodus. So the exodus as a whole is an allegory. And from our weeks past talking about this, we get to now this point of the exodus being an allegory for the devotional conversation's growth and development. Because it is. It is an allegory that I think many of us have to respect because the individuals tuning into me, and even if you are at this time tuning into me, it is because you're recognizing something your conversation is missing, or you're recognizing something that your conversation wants to take further. And it wants to take its level of consciousness further. It wants to take its knowing personal. Well, we have to be able to recognize the patterns that the scriptures lay out for us to recognize in order for us to do that. Point one is the Egyptian paradigm. If our conversation is confined to this, we need to leave it. Why? Because that's the layout and that's the format. And that's the layout and that's the format because it's a continual and it's written in present tense for a specific reason. It's a continual format. It's a continual pattern, whether, as I began by saying, literally or publicly, or inwardly or personally. It's a format. And once we can recognize that format, once we're not afraid anymore, once we are finally crying out and willing to cry out for help, well, then that's when our cry and our prayer will be heard, and we will be sent on a journey to be alone. Now, we cannot reject that opportunity that life is sending us to have a conversation existing alone. No pastor so and so, no website this or that, no different 15 churches that we need to go to, no different websites, or exist alone. You and the voice within the scriptures, just as it was Moses, his voice, and the congregation, we need to do the same. We need to be that Moses, to take that courage. And we need to allow the scriptures, just as Moses communicated on the Mount, we need to let the scriptures to be that communicating voice to us so that we can then take what is communicated back to the members within our devotional conversation, as I alluded to in our last meeting last week, just as Moses took the message from the Mount to the members of the congregation. So we need to repeat that same process because it is a perpetual pattern of growth and development that we have to, if we know and we sense something is wrong, we need to really do the steps to make our conversation healthy. We can't just let our belief remain sick. We can't just stay questioning. We can't just stay in the realm of denominated understanding when we know that what is within us needs something more than what our denomination is giving to us. We need to be able to take courage and to have face-to-face value with the scriptures and to let that be the voice to instruct what is within. When we do so, we will get plagues to what is within. What is within will suffer. because we're getting an understanding of what is genuine and what is authentic belief and experience, or should I say, journey. These plagues will cause us to further move away from what we believed to an experience to where we can gravitate to principles that are decent according to our personal experience, mixing with the devotional character within the scriptures. There's no such thing as having principles, commandments, and an experience contrary to what is within the scriptures if we are saying our experience is within the scriptures. The mind inspiring the scriptures is a philosophy wanting the conversation isolated only to its mind, because it is by isolating only to its mind that we can gain an experience to heal our human being. That's the underlying there, the health of our human condition. But because our human condition relies so much on our spiritual mind, or so much on the consciousness of our devotional character or of our religious belief, well, our human being is dictated by the impulse of what we take to be religion. When we can get what we take to be religion schooled and corrected, as the pattern allegory states, well, then our human condition will be able to reside in a level of existence or a form or a shape that is conducive to its industrial or personal or personal well-being. To do this, those plagues of understanding, we have to allow them to work. And when they do work, when we enter into that wilderness or period of alone, that is when we will begin to learn correct principles according to the mind within the scriptures. These correct principles, we have to be able to learn them so that we can unlearn what the religious world has given to us, what the paradigm of Egypt has given to us. We have to learn them. The diet and the appointment of rest, we have to learn them. Doing so will allow a personal covenant to form, and that's what all of this is about. It's all about forming a personal covenant, as it says, as we reviewed it last week in the book of Ezekiel 20, to purge from the conversation rebellious members, rebellious characters, so that through that personal covenant, our conversation can have a tie to its experience. That covenant is binding us to the experience for it to remain pure. That covenant is binding us to the experience for it to remain holistic. And remaining holistic for the purpose of understanding further the journey according to the devotional character within the Bible. And so I'll end it there. I'll end it there for the conversation to take itself serious enough to take courage to let the scriptures counsel it so that it can counsel the members within for the purpose of entering into a personal covenant with that experience and with the mind of it. Entering into that personal covenant, we will enter into an agreement to where we will remain faithful to that mind within the scriptures, and we will enter into marriage and remain faithful to the spirit of our conversation's mind, to never betray it, to never cheat on it with what we did formerly or with who we did it with formerly. In the with and the who, in the sense of philosophy, in the sense of ritual, in the sense of understanding or belief. Our conversation really needs this from us. Our conversation is crying for this from us. We have to give this to our conversation. The book of Malachi, chapter 2, be faithful to the spirit or to the wife of your youth. And that wife is the spirit of our conversation's conscience. That spouse, we have a spouse when we enter into our experience with the scriptures. We have a spouse, and that spouse is the spirit of our mind. We have to remain faithful to that spouse because that's our household. Our household has to form. And that's what the allegory of the Exodus is pointing to. It is pointing to getting your household in order. And in the Psalm 50, that last verse, it says, he who is willing to put their conversation in order will I show the salvation of God. So when we're seeing the Exodus and when we're seeing the principles therein, how that is being played out, we're actually seeing the process of salvation and its revelation. And if our conversation can set itself in order, we too will understand and we will be shown what the salvation of the scriptures actually is. And that salvation is a salvation that is inward, that is coming from the mind of the conversation, deliverance for the conversation's thoughts and feelings to the point where it can endure its suffering plagues of understanding to cultivate a terrain of its own with a landscape that is familiar only and synonymous with or to the character that is within the scriptures. And that is an allegory or the allegory of the scriptures. It is your personal journey to the manner of devotion as witnessed or as counseled for or by or through uh, the mind of the Bible. This is what we have to tie to. This is what our conversation has to grow familiar with, because doing so allows us to enter into a personal covenant with that experience and with those scriptures to remain faithful to it, so that we will never do anything to betray the self that the mind inspiring our experience has done to lead us out into this experience. So, again, as usual, take everything that we go through for this week on as the purpose for creation. Take for creation, but also take for creation for the purpose of entering into a personal covenant with the living God. Enter into personal covenant through creation so that our conversation can begin to understand core principles to keep itself sound and safe and without anything outside of it and outside of the scriptures to keep it healthy. When we can do this, well, we do well to our conversation.